So everybody, welcome back to the Legal Blend podcast. I'm Kaefer Garcia, your host, and today we have a very special guest that will talk about what I like to call the sexiness of title insurance in the state of New Jersey in a real estate transaction. But before we get to that, we're going to highlight, as always, a local coffee shop, and I wanted to talk to you today about Kaefer in Hasbrook Heights. So it's a local coffee shop on the boulevard in Hasbrook Heights. And they have a variety of coffee flavors for you to try. But also, the good part is if you're going with someone that doesn't really like coffee or is not a coffee lover, they have actually mocktails, beautiful moss walls. You could sit down, do work, chat with your friends. So definitely check them out on the boulevard in Hasbrook Heights. We love going there to get some of our coffee fixes. So back to our special guest today, I want to introduce Peter Perperas from Investment Title. I guarantee you this will be a great episode because Pete has been in the title insurance business for about 17 years. Is that correct?
Give or take a few.
Give or take, give or take, give or take. He's with Investment Title, and I would say Pete is a frequent visitor to our office. Why? Because we love to close with Pete, right? Pete Investment Title. He will take care of you, and we'll get into the specifics of why we have Pete today on our podcast. But Pete, welcome, first of all.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for coming. And to start off, easy. What's on your mind today? What's going on?
Well, I've been doing a lot of networking.
Okay.
I had a networking event last night. Successful. A B&I type group I'm joining actually that I went to the first meeting this morning.
Early,
it's called
I'm
Be
guessing.
Sure. You had to be there 8 a.m. Not too early.
Oh, not too early.
Not too bad. Not too bad. So
Okay.
I beat most of the traffic.
Gotcha.
But yeah, just trying to spread the word about the company, about our business, about the service we provide, and just making some new contacts. So,
Gotcha. You're always networking.
trying.
Always.
Yes.
always. And before we get into the nitty-gritty of title insurance and what it is and all that, just a little bit more about you. What is, for example, a quote you live by? Something that you can relate to?
Maybe not necessarily a quote, but a thing I like to live by is that I like to treat people how I want to be treated and hopefully get that same in return. And just try to be a good person, do good business, provide good service, and enjoy people that we work with, so that's why I'm here.
Perfect. Exactly. And we're going to introduce title insurance. And I think what I like to tell people is it's the forgotten aspect of a real estate transaction. A lot of people, when we discuss it, do not know what it is. So, Pete, can you tell us what is title insurance?
Okay, so to put it in easy terms and not to bore everybody and go droning on and on. Basically, every time there's a real estate transaction that takes place, whether it be a purchase or a refinance of a property, if there's going to be a bank involved or even if there's not, title insurance is going to be required. And we just make sure that when ownership is transferring from a seller to a buyer, that there's no liens on that property or judgments against that seller or anything monetarily related that can transfer over with the property when a new homeowner takes ownership.
Gotcha. So I'm just going to throw an example out there. Let's say a seller owes $150,000 in child support. How do you guys help with that?
That would come up in the searches that we do prior to that file closing or that transfer of the title or the deed or ownership of the property. So that will come up, and that would have to be something that's satisfied either prior to closing or on the day of. So anything house related, mortgage, unpaid taxes, contractor wasn't paid for work that they did on the property, they can put a lien on the property and it'll all fall behind the mortgage. The bank, anytime they're lending out, hundreds of thousands of dollars to anybody, they're gonna wanna make sure that that mortgage they're giving out to that client or to that borrower is in a first lien position on the property. God forbid the buyer defaults on payments, they can take the house as collateral, sell, and regain any debts that were unpaid.
Gotcha.
So any other lien would kind of fall in behind that. Taxes would actually supersede the mortgage. They have to be paid first, and then the mortgage would be second. So, and then everything else after that, if any.
Gotcha.
So we check to make sure everything's free and clear before we sign the paperwork and transfer ownership over.
So Pete, I've mentioned it throughout this episode, the sexiness of title insurance. And I want to kind of have our clients envision, our viewers envision what it is a day-to-day what happens at the office in the back end of things?
So basically, when we get a fully executed or fully signed contract by seller and a buyer, sent into the office, and the title technically needs to be ordered, we have search companies that we deal with, or people in each county clerk's office that can search the records of that property.
Okay.
And make sure every time there was a change of ownership that everything was cleared of liens, mortgages, judgments, anything of that nature, anything that can attach to that property that seller may have to pay before technically a new buyer takes over.
So Pete, does that mean like you guys have a filing cabinet, you go in and you pick out
Well,
files?
things are changing a little
Okay,
bit. So it used to be that way. It used to be big books with deeds and mortgages on there, and some counties are still like that, where they'll physically have to look through and make sure recorded documents and recorded mortgages were paid, or if not paid, they will be due at closing. But a lot of stuff is done online now.
Okay.
So when we do a closing and we get a signed mortgage from a buyer, we have to send that down to the county clerk's office for recording. And that lets the world know that there is a lien on that property, an open mortgage. Each real estate transaction is very unique. However, the process is always the same. So that's what we're good at. We've seen lots of scenarios. We have lots of experience in my office. I think combined like 100 years of experience some of the people in our back office have, which is great because there's a lot of things that come up. Lots of sometimes multiple owners. We got to track people down. God forbid somebody passes away and there's no will, or there's the property wasn't recorded to deed or to transfer to an heir or a daughter or another owner. So there's lots of due diligence on the back end as far as making sure that this transaction can take place. So we kind of make sure these things happen as well with everybody else involved.
Of course, no, but you're sometimes I call you guys a due diligence police, right?
Yeah.
Because you make sure everything is in order for us to get to closing, right? Along with the whole team. But yes, that's the major responsibility on the title company. That's why I say it's a lot of sexiness that happens in the back end.
Yes. A lot of stuff happens behind the scenes that our office takes care of to make sure that the transactions take place.
There's a lot of TV reality shows out there, the sexiness of realtors, bidding wars, appraisals, home inspections, a big thing. But no one recognizes the sexiness of title insurance. And I say that because it's, I think, one of the most crucial things you need to get in a real estate transaction, right? Because tell me, Pete, why do we need it? Why is it necessary?
Well, I'll give an example. So let's say somebody originally purchased a home 2 years ago, and their interest rate was 6 or 7%. Another company provided title insurance. They were insured that anything prior to that original purchase date, all liens were satisfied and paid. So that way we could transfer ownership from seller to buyer.
Okay.
So let's fast forward now to next year. Hopefully rates go down to 5%, whatever is worth saving for that client.
Right.
We come in, we provide title again, we'll update off of, we'll go back as far as we need to go back to make sure all the chains of title were clear. Everything was satisfied leading up into that new transaction, which would be the refinance. And let's say the previous title company on the original purchase had missed a lien or a mortgage that had now come up in our searches that was missed on the original purchase day. That client would have been issued an owner's title insurance policy, which would cover them for anything that was missed when they originally purchased the home.
Gotcha.
We would go back to that original company and say, hey, this mortgage came up on our searches, potentially missed when initial searches were done for this borrower to purchase.
Right.
And they would either provide proof that it was paid, or that would be a claim against the original policy.
Gotcha. Now, Pete, two things, right? Two things that we always, I would say, are misconceptions about title insurance. One, is it like life insurance or car insurance or home insurance where they pay monthly?
No.
How does that work?
It's one-time payment at the day of closing, so at the day of purchase. when all the documentation is being signed. It's part of the total closing costs that the bank will estimate or give to the buyer on the closing day. But it's a one-time payment. If somebody refinances after that original purchase, let's say 3 times in the next 10 years, we would give a refinance rate. Okay. We always have to ensure the amount of, if it's a purchase, the full purchase price. If it's a refinance, the amount that they're borrowing from the bank.
Right.
So it is slightly discounted, but it always go off of exact numbers. We are regulated by the state of New Jersey.
Okay.
So they tell us what to charge.
Okay.
And mostly off a purchase price or refinance amount.
And the other misconception, right? The second one is usually we're ordering title in the middle of the transaction, right? And clients are telling me, well, I want a quote. We get them a quote from investment title. And then they say, oh, I have to pay that out of pocket right now, like a home inspection, like an appraisal. Is that true?
No. Everything will be included at the end as part of the closing costs,
Perfect.
the total closing costs.
Okay. Yeah,
So initially, when they apply for the loan and they're getting pre-approved and going through underwriting process, once a client is under contract, the bank will initially give an estimate of the title costs. Sometimes we'll provide them with a quote so they can be a little more accurate as far as what the client's closing costs will be on the day of purchase.
Right.
But yeah, it can all be paid at closing. So
Now, I would say, if you want to call it the third misconception, right, is, well, and I think you touched upon it a little bit, how long does a title policy last? Is it, like you said, I pay it for one time, right, when I purchase my home, and it's a one-time payment, like you said, as part of closing costs, but how long does this policy last? Does it expire?
Well, it won't expire per se, but if somebody, let's say, stays in a property, pays off their 30-year mortgage in 30 years, and they go to sell, it'll be a new buyer's job to obtain title insurance to pretty much pick up where they left off. If that seller provides their title insurance policy, say, hey, we closed on this day 30 years ago, here's our proof of our insurance policy that everything was free and clear as of then. There will be some additional searches that are done just to kind of double check things.
Right.
But that buyer will then update that title insurance policy for themselves and insure the amount they're going to buy for. And then searches would be done again.
Gotcha. Now, insurance policy. Some people say insurance policy equals protection, right? So what is this protection that we're buying? What is included as far as protection? You touched upon liens, judgments, things like that. But let's talk about what it protects and what is not included in this insurance policy that you've seen that sometimes comes up.
As far as title insurance is concerned and issuance of policies and that part is, we're basically doing the work to make sure that that property before it transfers ownership is free and clear of any debt, liens, encumbrances, anything that could affect the value or that new buyer coming in to take over that property, because everything will transfer with the property. So as far as the protection, it gives that buyer peace of mind that when they take over that property, the only debt that they will have will be that mortgage. Okay. That's what they will be responsible paying for. Title is required anytime somebody's going to take a loan out on a property. Also, and I know you could speak to this, being the legal aspect of the transaction, I don't really know one single attorney that would represent somebody on a purchase, even if it was a cash purchase, no bank involved, no requirement from the bank to provide title insurance or obtain title insurance. You probably wouldn't represent them if they didn't spend the money to get that done. God forbid anything were to come back after the fact, or when they go to sell, or if they were going to refinance, because the cost of it could be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars if a large mortgage was missed or any type of lien was missed.
100%. When I call clients to see if they want our services, I tell them I rarely guarantee something in my profession, right? It's always, it depends. But one thing I guarantee them is I will not represent you if you do not get title insurance, because I wouldn't do that myself. I would never buy a property, even if it's cash, without a title search, without a title insurance. I'm sure you wouldn't either.
No.
So if I wouldn't do it for myself or for my father, my brother, whoever, says I'm not going to do it, I'm not going to get title insurance, then I wouldn't represent them because that's how delicate of a situation that is, right? That big of a risk. So yeah, definitely. One thing I can guarantee as a lawyer is that I will not represent someone who does not get title insurance.
Yeah, it's a big part of a transaction, and it is important.
Right.
If something goes miss, God forbid, you're on the hook not only for your mortgage, but then you could be default on that mortgage if that lien technically is, well, the bank's going to require it anytime you
Right.
get a mortgage. But if you're a cash buyer and you buy a property and you bypass using an attorney, bypass title, you fix that property, go to sell it, or even rent it out, whatever you do, and anytime when you go to sell, if there was any liens that are on there, that seller would be responsible for all of that. So
Right.
to spend a couple of thousand, depending upon the purchase price, on a fee for you, a fee for us, we'll make sure that that ownership is transferred over properly,
Right.
and everything is clear, so the buyer can sleep well at night knowing it's their house.
100%, 100%, because that's something that, like I tell people, would you drive a car without car insurance? Some people do that, but I wouldn't recommend it. But that's something that we definitely make it mandatory. Now, Pete, let me ask you something. Number one tip, because you've been in this field for 17 years, right, in the real estate field. Number one tip you would give a buyer buying a home.
Very important. Something that us at our company and we try to live by is that we try to stress the importance of having a team and having people that are familiar working with each other. It's important because there's so many moving parts in a transaction. We have a buyer, we have a seller, we have a buyer attorney, we have a seller attorney, we have a title company, we have a bank lending the money, processors at the bank, closers at the bank, lots of people involved.
Right.
So there's lots of moving parts. So, our importance when we come in, providing title maybe midway through the transaction, and then up until closing, working out numbers and figures and prorating costs for buyers and sellers. We kind of corral everybody at the end.
Right.
But the most important thing is being comfortable as a buyer, knowing that we're all working for you.
Right.
And for your transaction, your purchase. And it's good that everybody kind of plays nice in the sandbox. We're all working towards the same goal, and that's to, get the buyer into the property as easy and as timely as we can. Realtors have the same objective: buying, selling. Attorneys, bank wants, we all want that same thing for the client. And so that's why I feel it's vitally important to work with a good team, people that you can trust. Everybody plays their part, and we get to the closing table and ultimately make the client happy.
And let me ask you, I was going to flip the question, but I'm not sure if it's going to be the same answer. Number one tip for someone selling their home.
Probably have a good attorney.
Okay.
I would suggest having a good attorney. The buyer is going to have to do more on their end.
Right.
Obviously, having a good agent, a real estate agent, is vitally important as well, so that you make sure your house is priced properly. You're getting as much as you can for something that you may have paid for 30 years or longer, or held on to for longer. So it's kind of the same answer. Right. Team is important. People you work with are important. You not only have to be comfortable with them, you want to be able to rely on them and trust them. And a lot of money is changing hands, so it's important to be comfortable with who you're working with.
Gotcha. And for people who've never bought a home or sold a home, I want to touch upon, when do we see Pete? What is your position at Investment Title? Because I kind of introduced you part of Investment Title, but do we see Pete on closing day? Where do we see Pete? Yes. Does he pop in, right?
I will help out any way that I can throughout the transaction. If you have a buyer, or some of our realtors that we work with have buyers that have questions about closing costs, what title is, anything related to the transaction, because as a title company, we do touch everybody in the transaction: attorneys, bank, agents. We do speak with everybody regularly. So if I needed to jump in and answer some questions or fill somebody in, because a lot of people don't know what title insurance is, I don't mind doing that from the beginning of the process, middle, but mostly at the end is where I come in on closing day. I'll explain the documents to the client, make sure they're comfortable with payment, due date, breakdown of all the costs, and I'll go over everything with them in detail because it's a lot of paperwork that needs to be signed. So I want to make sure that that they're comfortable and clear with everything they're signing in.
Now, Pete, let me just throw a question at you. Let's see how you deal with this question. And because I want to touch upon it after you answer it. What's one word or two words that the team that you usually work with, the realtor, the attorney, how do you think they would describe you with one or two words? You as a person working with you.
I would like to say honest, nice, try to be genuine, honest person, try to do good business, try to take care of, the person we're dealing with. They'll come and go, but this may be the only time we see them because it may be the only house they purchase in their life. So I want them to have a good experience when they leave. So I'd say honesty and integrity would be good.
Right, right. No, and I wanted to ask you because personally, I can, for our viewers, I can relate to that because I've seen Pete do nearly the impossible to try to close a deal, right? The one reason we are so familiar with Pete is because we trust him. And trust, I think, is a big characteristic, big quality we look for in a real estate transaction. Like you said, clients are maybe buying or selling us home. It's one of the biggest transactions they're invested in their life. Mm-hmm. So it's very important who we work with, and we work with you. And one thing that I can say is the trust factor is there with you and you're reliable, right? I've seen Pete say, look, if I have to drive here or there to get something signed because the client had a medical emergency, whatever it is, he gets it done, right? And another thing is, we see you so frequently because you're here at closing all the time, and the way that you explain things to the clients, the way you take your time and don't rush through it, I think is one of the reasons why we always ask for you to be at closing, right? So definitely can attest to that because it's true. The team that we use is crucial because there's been many times where I can text you, call you and say, Pete, this, that, with title, we need to do this, we need to do that, and you're always available. Yeah, I can never say, you're not available. You're always available. So it's crucial to have that team and those key players be accessible in this transaction, right? Now, Pete, bringing it back to your experience, I'm sure you have a lot of war stories. Like I said, you do almost nearly the impossible to close. What's one thing that comes to mind as far as in this industry, something that says, wow, that was a crazy day, a crazy closing?
One thing in particular sticks out, kind of just popped in my head.
Okay.
I was thinking about this prior to sitting down, but it just popped in my head now. There was an instance a few years ago, I believe it was a year before COVID. Clients were on their way to the closing. Mm-hmm. Their rate was expiring that day, so we had to sign that day, no matter what. And I got a call from them and their car had broke down. They were in a gas station, not very far, but a few miles away. So I said, I'll be right there.
Okay.
So I just packed up my paperwork, drove there. We signed on the hood of my car.
Wow.
And they needed a ride, so I took them, dropped them off where they needed to go. And while their car got fixed, and they were stressed out because they didn't know how they were going to get to the office we were closing at. And I mean, it's a little thing. It's not a big deal, but it was just a little out of the ordinary as far as going over, about 100 pages on top of the hood of the car. Luckily, right. It was a nice day out. So, we got everything done. But point being, whatever I can do to help, it's a long process for the buyers. They're going through, sometimes 30, 45, 60 days of getting documentation over to the bank, negotiating back and forth with the seller, going over contract terms with you. So it is a process, and they're pretty drained and tired by the time they get to the point where we're going to sign and actually take the house over. So I'll do whatever I can to make it easy for them. And if something comes up, we got to adjust on the fly. It's no problem. So
wait. you were signing on the hood of their car, and then you drove them while they're.
They needed a ride, yeah. So after we were done, I would, take the paperwork, get it scanned, sent it over to the bank, make sure that, we got funding, meaning the bank knew everything was signed and signed properly. And so they give us the money, and we pay everybody involved in the transaction. They could take over the house. They needed a ride to the house.
So you heard it here first. Not just does he do title insurance,
Taxi cab service.
but do not call Avis, do not call Budget, do not call National. You have Pete. He'll help you out with that too, right? So, but no, it goes to the core theme of this, right? Is you're there, you're reliable, you're trustworthy, and we need that trust in a transaction. That title insurance brings to the transaction, right? That trust that I can buy this property because I did my homework, I did my due diligence through my title company.
Yep.
Right. So, no, Pete, thank you for coming in. We really appreciate
Thank
it.
you for having me.
At Legal Blend Podcast and at Garcia Law, we always recommend Pete Investment Title because, again, the trust is there, the reliability is there, and it's just always a fun time with Pete when he comes to the office, definitely.
Thank you for the kind words.
Thank you for coming, Pete. Thank you
Appreciate
for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.